County, Nevada Planning Commission. My name is Kirk Walder, and I will be chairing today's meeting. I will call the meeting to order, and for the purposes of determining a quorum, I will call the roll and ask members to confirm their attendance. Christy?
Present.
Bryce?
Present.
Dave?
Present.
Mark? Mark, I think you need to unmute.
Present.
Ryan?
Present.
Maureen?
Present.
So we have all 7 members, a quorum. Brian, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Yes, sir. For which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Brian. We will now take public comment. At this time, public comment will be taken on those items that are within the jurisdiction and control of the Planning Commission. Public comment cards and comments left on the county's website prior to the meeting have been compiled and made a part of the supporting materials that have been provided to the Planning Commission and public for review. Only 2 periods of public comment will be taken during this meeting, once at the beginning of the meeting and again at the end of the meeting. Public comment will not be taken on each agenda item. Public comment is limited to 3 minutes per person who has left a voice message on Douglas County's public comment phone line, 775-783-6088. Once a public comment period has opened. Once public comment closes, the voice messages will be played to the public and Planning Commission in the order they were recorded. No more than 1 voice message public comment per person will be played during each public comment period. The Planning Commission wants to encourage the respectful consideration of all views by members of the public. If the content of any voicemail is willfully disruptive of the meeting by being irrelevant, repetitious, slanderous, offensive, inflammatory, irrational, or amounts to a personal attack or interfering with the rights of others, the voice message will be skipped to the next public comment. Douglas County's public comment phone line became available to take public comment at 10 a.m. Public comment will remain open for at least 5 minutes to allow members of the public to call or until the last caller has finished leaving a voice message on the county's public comment phone line. Colleen, if you have public comments, you can please begin to play them now. Thank you.
Okay, so far I have 3. Give me a minute.
Jim Slade, SLADE. First of all, I'd like to thank members Casey and Nettenrick for their leadership on the agricultural and open space preservation initiative, which is important both to the ag community and to the public at large to help preserve the values that make the Carson Valley such a special place. Thanks also to the Planning Commission as a whole and the board for moving this issue forward so that it will be on the November ballot. On agenda item number 3, while I understand some of the housing concerns in this item, we have to distinguish between needs and wants, some of which seem to be driven by pro-development special interests. We're all fortunate to live in such a desirable area, due principally to our rural character, open space, scenic beauty, low traffic, and good quality of life. But not everyone that wants to live in Douglas County is going to be able to. A perceived need for more low and moderate income housing should not, however, be used as an excuse to build, ruining many of the essential elements that make Douglas County so special. This would just be another giveaway to development interest. The exact wrong approach to our situation in Douglas County would be to flood the market with housing with the misplaced hope that that would somehow lower prices so that anyone and everyone that wants to live here can. It is understandable we want attainable homes for our young teachers and sheriff's deputies, but how do you propose to make sure that they are able to buy those houses rather than retirees from California against whom they would be bidding? You can't. Every housing development approved in recent years has said that their homes will be market priced. Staff continues to claim for every development application that comes forward that there's a demonstrated need for additional housing while supplying no evidence to support that. Just a vague, biased belief that we need more housing. Inexplicably, they refuse to acknowledge the 7,000 plus homes that could already be built based on past approvals including those that are in the pipeline, like the 2,500 homes on Park Ranch land, even if not completely approved. There were approximately 4,000 homes that could be built in developments approved prior to last year. Ignoring all those approvals and still claiming that there is a need is insulting and contrary to the public interest. By the way, the self-serving housing industry report from the Nevada Building Alliance by Brandon Hill should be ignored as it is clearly biased by their profit motive. Staff, the Planning Commission, and the board need to acknowledge all the approved and nearly approved developments and take that into account when new applications for master plan amendments and developments come along. To do otherwise would be to ruin the qualities that our residents prize most: our rural character, open space, and quality of life. Thank you.
Okay, here comes two. My name is Ellie Waller, E-L-L-I-E-W-A-L-L-E-R. I'd like to thank the commissioners for their robust comments at the last meeting, now bringing forward housing information, and thank staff for today's info. The Conway proposed rezone project was completely dismissed at the last BOC meeting as the applicants did not attend. The citizens of Indian Hills, Jack Valley deserve to update their community plan before any more rezoning and residential projects or housing units are approved. I appreciate staff is overwhelmed and understaffed with too many issues to address, but that doesn't mean the communities at large should suffer until additional staff can be hired. The master plan overlays and updates do not and should not approve zoning changes. We need to update the community plans before we are overridden with changes, before those changes become the new character of the areas that also bring increased traffic, possible increased density. We cannot undo these for future generations. This is not a new comment or the only comment on community plan updates. It's time to get started. I have listened to the Prosperity Center's narrative for many years in North Lake Tahoe. This is related to Renee Louie's comment. Her comment: for the past 5 years, there's been a continuing trend of like-type responses of lack of sufficient housing stock to serve the workforce. The sum of the charts also include Nevada Builders Alliance, which are also in the Prosperity Center presentation. My comment to the BOCC and now you as commissioners: how about the casinos, hospitals, Vail, bigger employers all get together and build the needed affordable housing for their employees? At the BOCC meeting, Mr. Slade had an excellent idea. Let's start with the Lakeside Inn. I say, let those employers provide fair share of the burden of renovation for housing for their employees. I also want to say there are older homes, apartments, and condos available in North and South Lake Tahoe. An inventory of current homes on the market in price ranges that are affordable to the missing middle, as North Lake Tahoe coined it, never surfaces. Truckee Building, Reno, Carson are in a building boom. Many want newer homes. That may not be the reality for all. There are charts here that support why we need to update the community plans first. Approve projects designed for attainable housing. Increase allowed density. The list should be considered by those communities first where this housing is going to be approved. We may not want greater densities or height, or why do we need 2,500 square foot homes as typical in Carson City? I urge you to consider recommending community plan updates as necessary before any more zoning changes. Thank you.
Thank you. Colleen, do you have any other recordings on the comment line at this point?
Yeah, one more. I'm just getting it open.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead when you have it.
Record DEC0 SHIZURU. I am in support of item number 2 for the Holiday Inn Pet Resort variance to include overnight boarding on commercial properties in Douglas County. Number 1, it is consistent with the ordinance in Tahoe Township and other locations across the country. There is no logical reason for this discrepancy between Tahoe and Carson Valley, and there is no logical reason to maintain the requirement of 10 acres. Number 2, the demand for overnight boarding of pets is huge in Carson Valley. I have used these services for years prior to Holiday Inn Pet Resort opening, and I have been subjected to the non-availability and inflexible hours to deliver and pick up my dog at other businesses. Increasing the supply of overnight boarding facilities in Carson Valley is a welcomed addition to our business community. My dog Maggie was the very first customer of Holiday Inn Pet Resort in late November 2019. I observed that their business was instantly successful and doing a great business until the coronavirus shutdown. I'm confident that it will rebound now that it has reopened, and hopefully with the new variants of allowing boarding. There is not enough variety of businesses in our downtown corridor. There's a plethora of casinos, gaming establishments, bars, sit-down restaurants, and food restaurants, and antique stores. A pet daycare and boarding business is such a congenial addition to our area. That's it.
Okay, that's what we have so far.
Okay,
That's it.
let's keep the public comment line open. I have one comment that I can read into the record. This is from Anya D. Knief, the former chair of the Planning Commission. It says, "Dear Mr. Walder and Planning Commissioners, as a former Planning Commissioner and being a realtor in Douglas County for almost 25 years, I would like to add some comments to agenda item number 3 regarding master plan amendments addressing future needs and growth factors that may want to be considered going forward. When I first moved to our lovely valley, there were many areas of the country, specifically the southern ranchos, that had infrastructure in place, but no housing being built as yet, as there was no housing boom at the time, 1985. In the early 2000s and through 2006, we certainly saw a strong demand for additional housing due to the influx of not only retirees, but workforce residents, including first responders, healthcare workers, as well as those in the construction trade, restaurant, and retail sector, as well as our traditional tourist casino industry workers. Unfortunately, the pricing of homes during that peak time was from the high 200,000s to low 300,000. This was unfortunately a price that most workforce residents could not afford. Many were forced to look in Dayton, Stagecoach, or even as far away as Silver Springs to find homes that they could purchase on their wages. As a realtor, I was saddened by the lack of available housing, affordable housing in Douglas County by our most deserving necessary workers. Unfortunately, that situation has again emerged in the new demand for housing in our county. It is disheartening for me to tell young families starting out with well-paying jobs that they can't afford a home in our county again. I strongly urge that workforce housing is made available to those who work in Douglas County and will help make it a strong, viable, and desirable area to not only work but live. I won't mention any specific projects, but will point out that townhome projects, manufactured housing projects, and rental projects under consideration would be welcome and necessary in our valley. They will not create slums, drug areas, or even gang areas. That is a clear case of illogical, irrational, and alarmist thinking. I believe the sum of the whole, workforce housing, while exceeding the positive expectations and outcomes of benefiting our county. Sincerely, Anya D. Knief. Colleen, anything else on the comment line?
Nope, doesn't look like it.
Okay. I do want to remind everyone that public comment can also be made by submitting comments by email to planning@douglasnv.us. Please make sure to include your name, item number, and position on the item. And any written public comment received the day of the meeting will be compiled and added as supplemental materials to the county's website and will be distributed to the Planning Commission within 24 hours after the meeting. I would also like to indicate that during our last meeting, some individuals expressed that their meeting froze at certain times. I've been informed by our staff at SoCo-CV that this could be either a weak internet connection or perhaps just go ahead and refresh your browser. In addition, they note that the Google Chrome browser is sometimes better optimized to support YouTube. So people can try that browser. If there are no other public comments, then I believe the time is 1:14 and we will close opening public comment. The county's public comment phone line will be remaining open to allow for closing public comment to be recorded as the meeting progresses. We'll now move to to approval of the agenda. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved. Bryce.
Bryce, that was you. Thank you very much. Is there a second?
Second.
Brian, on second.
Maureen, I heard you first, so Bryce has moved and Maureen has seconded the approval of the agenda. Is there discussion on approval agenda? Seeing no discussion, then I'll call for the vote. Let's start with Christie on approval of the agenda.
Aye.
Bryce,
Aye.
Dave,
Aye.
Mark,
Aye.
Brian,
Aye.
Maureen.
Aye.
The chair votes aye, so the motion passes 7-0. We'll now move to approval of the minutes. I would note that I submitted several minor grammatical and typographical corrections to clerk, and there are also corrections in the names on several of the vote boxes that did not affect the outcome of any of the votes. Are there other corrections to the minutes?
I submitted my minutes to Amy yesterday, and I would like to say on the record, on page 33, I said, I can't, because I don't have them in front of me, I can't tell you exactly what paragraph, but I said 700,000 acres were saved. It was actually 120,000. 700,000 was the purchase price of a large tract of land that was preserved in Sonoma County. So with that, I'll move adoption of the minutes unless others have corrections.
Okay, Maureen, thank you. Other corrections or comments on the minutes? Seeing none, Maureen has made a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second the minutes.
Brian seconds the approval of the minutes. So we'll take the roll on approval of the minutes if there's no discussion. Christie?
Aye.
And Bryce?
Aye.
Dave?
Aye.
Mark?
Aye.
Ryan?
Aye.
Maureen?
Aye.
And the chair votes aye. So in this, it's a 7-0 vote on approval of the minutes. We will now move to the first of the three items on our agenda today. So I'll read the first item into the record. This is for possible action. Discussion on ordinance 2020-1570 to amend section 20.668.280 of the Douglas County Code relative to non-residential uses specific standards to revise standards for a heliport in the light industrial zoning district and other properly related matters. Sam, you may start the presentation.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a disclosure.
Go ahead, Maureen.
I live probably 3 to 4 miles as the crow flies from the airport in the flight pattern of the airplanes and the helicopters. I don't think it will cause me to be unreasonable and vote against the project based on that fact.
Thank you very much, Maureen. Any other disclosures or comments before Sam begins? Okay, Sam, it's all yours.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman and members of the Commission. Sam Booth, Planning Manager for the record. The first item, as you read into the record there, Chairman, is a zoning text amendment for change to the code for as it relates to an industrial heliport. And are you seeing slide 2 there? It looks like there's a delay in my screen here. Okay. So the background here is that the applicant is Harry Naransky of Helicopter Parts International. And in 2014, the applicant applied for and received approval to amend Douglas County Code Title 20 to allow a heliport as an accessory use in the light industrial zoning district. And that is still subject to a special use permit. So it's not permitted outright, but requires a special use permit in the light industrial zoning. And later in 2014, Mr. Ransky applied for and received approval of that special use permit and has since constructed a heliport on the property that he's been utilizing for his business. So currently within the code, as I laid out, heliports are permitted outright in several zoning districts, the A19, the FR19, and FR40 zoning districts, the RA10, rural agriculture 10 acre, and the PR, private recreation, as well as AP, which is the airport zoning district. And then again, the only district that requires the special use permit is the light industrial district. You can see at the bottom here is the use table with the heliport highlighted, heliport use highlighted with an S, showing that it requires a special use permit. The definition of a heliport is that it's any, it means any designated area used for the landing and taking off of helicopters, including all necessary passenger and cargo facilities, fueling and emergency service facilities. And this use shall provide proof of having obtained and having maintained as many as may be periodically requested by the county, all applicable local, state, and federal permits. Additionally, under the definition for heliport, there's a section in code that lays out standards for a heliport in a light industrial zoning district. These 8 standards that are at the bottom of the slide were created in 2014 when Mr. Naransky applied to add these into the code provision. And my understanding from the staff report at that time was that staff met with the airport manager and came up with these conditions, and Mr. Naransky agreed to them. And then when that was ultimately approved, they were added to the county code. So the proposal today by the applicant is to revise the code to allow others to use his heliport on his property, as well as to additionally to allow commercial flights. And so you can see the proposed changes it's shown below at the bottom of the slide. So he is requesting to strike item D, which says that only the property owner would utilize the heliport and customers will not. And he is requesting to strike item F, which says that there will be no commercial flights to and from the facility. Additionally, in item G, there's revised language that instead of refueling, that would be cut from the language. Now it will say there will be no storage of fuel at the facility. So it could allow refueling, but not storage of fuel at the facility. The other A, B, C, E, G, and H items of code would remain unchanged, and he's not proposing any changes to those. The findings for the zoning text amendment you can find in your packet. I've provided a response for each of those findings and believe the findings can be made. Those are on pages 46 through 47. Ultimately, if this change is approved, a future applicant would have to apply for a special use permit, as I've stated already, in order to operate a heliport in the light industrial zoning district. And so that would be reviewed by the Planning Commission. And as part of the special use permit, there are findings in there that are very site specific that discuss the appropriateness in the adjacent neighborhood, the impact to adjacent properties, those type of things. So this change will not change the fact that you would still have to apply for a special use permit. And Chairman, that's all I have on this item, but I would say that Mr. Naransky is on the line and is available for questions.
Great. Thank you very much, Sam. Mr. Naransky, did you have comments that you wanted to make at this point? If you do, you can go ahead. If not, we'll start with questions or comments from the Planning Commission members.
Yes. First of all, the way things are these days, I sure could use a little more cash flow. And I've always intended to have my helicopter for one day getting some income with it. I spent quite a bit of money updating this aircraft, and I've flown with the FAA, and the FAA, of course, have my helipad is built to FAA standards, and they're waiting on what the county does before they give me my permit themselves. They have no problems with it. I supplied a couple letters from Mark Heinzman, and he is the FAA inspector out of Reno that comes into my facility and overlooks my business. And he is quite willing to work with me with the helipad. The impact is actually quite minor because I only fly that aircraft basically on weekends. And the FAA has offered to use my helicopter for training purposes out of Reno. So the type of flying that they will be doing is IFR instrument training and approaches, mostly to the Reno airport, because it's a IFR airport. And the helicopter would leave here and go north. So we figure, we're planning anyways, about end of June, that there might be as much as 1 or 2 flights a week, maybe. Maybe 1 flight a week. So I know it's not very much flying, but it would be revenue flying for me, and it would help out quite a bit, especially with my taxes that keep going up. And the economy right now, as you know, is not very good. So the flight impact would be minimal, if anything at all.
Thank you very much. I'll recognize Planning Commission members that want to ask questions or raise issues. Please just give me the high sign if you would like to be recognized, and we'll go in whatever order people have questions. Bryce, go ahead with your questions or comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the Planning Commission members, I just wanted to say that I had an opportunity to speak with the airport manager, Chris Johnson, and he was in favor of this change. He didn't take any exception to it.
Great, thank you, Bryce. Any other Planning Commission members have questions or comments? Mr. Naransky, I have one quick question. On the item G that you're asking to have changed, previously it said there would be no refueling. Did you store fuel at the facility previously? Or
No.
Okay, so you're just trying to get a little more comfort level for everybody that not only are you're not going to be storing fuel. If you need to refuel, you can bring in a fuel truck or something like that to refuel.
That's exactly correct. Hut Aviation on the airport here brings their truck over to refuel my aircraft, and it saves me a start and an extra landing on the aircraft, and then they leave immediately. So that part has been working okay on occasion. I was sometimes landing at the airport, but the cost of operation of the engine in this aircraft, probably about $200 to start it. So any little bit sort of helps here.
Great, thank you. And then maybe if I could ask the staff, Sam Booth, I think you're probably the appropriate person. You indicated that we'll have a special use permit, and that'll have to come before the Planning Commission for approval. And in that special use permit, we'll go through all the particulars, and there will be a public notice for individuals within a certain radius of the facility. Is that correct?
That's correct, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Naransky, as I said, also has a special use permit. And so if the changes are made to the development code, he will also have to make those changes or be approved to make those changes to a special use permit as well. I believe there's some additional conditions within a special use permit. But so if this change is made, he would apply to revise the special use permit, would have to come back before the planning commission. And that application does require notice to adjacent property owners. The zoning text amendment does not, but that one would.
Great, Sam, thank you. I appreciate that explanation. Any other members that have questions or comments?
I
Maureen?
have a question.
Go ahead, Maureen.
On item, let's see, line number F, there will be no commercial flights to or from the facility. They want that removed from our zoning code. That concerns me because there isn't a limitation on what constitutes a commercial flight being proposed, or a limitation on the number of flights. Are we opening the door for a helicopter charter for flights going over the Tahoe Basin or along the valley?
Sam, do you want to go ahead and answer that?
Yeah, I can answer it to the extent that the fact that the proposal is just striking that language. So yes, Maureen, it would be opening that door. But any application within this light industrial zoning district, and that's only, these standards are only applying to the light industrial zoning helipad. So any application would still have to come forward with a special use permit. And it would be at that time that the planning commission could require additional conditions, limiting the number of flights, potentially, the type of business flights that are operated.
Is there any monitoring going on right now other than the applicant's declaration of the number of flights going in and out of this facility?
Yeah, there would, as with most things, that community development monitors, we're complaint based. And so we really monitor that just by if we're hearing a complaint that there's too many flights, or that there's something occurring, commercial flight or something like that on the site. And beyond that, the FAA does have a copy of Mr. Naransky's permit. And I think as he stated, they initiated this process, that they reached out and to the county, and they also then informed Mr. Naransky that he needed to amend his special use permit in the code to do what he's requesting to do. So just to the extent that the FAA also reviews the permit, I think that's about it.
Okay, I guess my concern is, well, I feel for everyone who is running a business nowadays, for their bottom line, I have concerns about changing the zoning code to accommodate one business, and that it will open the door to other applications coming in. I'm sorry, I just can't support this, not at this time. I don't have enough information. And I don't think bottom lines are the responsibility of the planning commission or the planning department.
But I would have to say that it's not the objective of the planning commission to restrict businesses' bottom lines neither.
Thank you, Maureen. Thank you, Brian. Mark, did you have comments that you wanted to make?
Yes. So I have a question for Sam. So when you have commercial flights, is there a whole nother requirement? Do you have to have bathrooms for your patrons? Do you have to provide food? I mean, to me, most aircrafts operate out of a airport where all of those things are provided. Will he have to provide all of those too if he is allowed to use this for commercial purposes?
Yes, depending on the business type or the proposal that he has. Yeah, I mean, if we were talking a full, helicopter tour business, and we would also look at it. So the property is approved for his helicopter parts business. Based on that, we do our design review for the property as far as parking, bathrooms, landscaping, everything that goes into that. That changes as you change the use within the building. Or as you add an additional use within the building. So it may require additional parking, additional public bathrooms. There are other standards, and we would review that as that proposal came forward.
So Sam, another question, what about fire suppression? if you're operating a commercial helipad, do you have to have fire suppression on site? Or
That's one I can't speak to. The guess there, easy answer would be yes. The fire department would be consulted. We'd definitely reach out to them with a design review application that would be required in the special use permit when he files that. But I don't know if Mr. Naransky knows anything further.
Mr. Naransky, you had your hand up. Would you like to comment on the questions that have been asked?
Yes, I understand what the lady, I can see her point, what she was getting at. Using the word commercial flight. In my instance here with my application, the reason we're using the word commercial is it means to be paid for that flight. It's not a type of a customer service where I have regular flights coming out of here. First of all, with the FAA, it's under Part 61. That is the procedure for this operation that I'm requesting at the moment, is Part 61, which means the flight instructor, in this case would be the FAA inspector, will come over with the student, get the aircraft, and go to the Reno airport or another airport where they can do their training. So there is no need for, like, I understand what the lady was saying, restaurants, bathrooms, which there is bathrooms anyway, we have all that. But there will be no need for a regular type of airline type operation at all. Part 91, which is a possibility also, which is slightly different, and that would be for like taking someone that wants to go and take some photos off Lake Tahoe, or go for up the valley and take a video, go to Mammoth and take a video or pictures. And Part 91 is, in this case, would be a 25-mile radius without landing at anywhere. You would not be able to land other than back at my facility or wherever the helicopter took off from. That's Part 91. So I wouldn't be able to take a passenger to Lake Tahoe and drop them off, or to Reno and drop them off. They would have to be picked up and returned to exactly the same spot where they got on the helicopter. So it is quite limited. It's the word commercial. Yeah, it's the reason we use that word is because it's for hire. And I guess that word would have probably been a little better there. But under those two conditions, it's very limited, very limited.
Thank you, Mr. Naransky. Maureen, did you have other questions that you wanted to ask or comments?
I recall discussion of the Part 61 FAA picking up the student going to a different airport, but I see nothing in the staff report or anything else other than what the applicant just said about Part 91 or a charter type flight to take someone to Mammoth or Tahoe to take photographs. Is that something that needs to be addressed under the special use permit?
Sam, go ahead if you want to answer that, but I think we've got a two-part process here. So this is the code change. Then if we need to address a variety of things under the special use permit, that's our next step at a future meeting. But go ahead, Sam, if you wanted to respond.
No, that's what I would say, that I think these details are exactly what the Planning Commission would want to hear about in hearing the special use permit, and then can make a decision whether or not to limit, to that Part 61 or the Part 91 or both, but something like that. But that, I think that can be applied at the special use permit level. And we're trying to, just big picture here, this is a code change that could affect any property. While it is a very specific code to light industrial and heliport, and there's not many of those in the county, to the extent that somebody else with a different business model or those type of things at a different location, the code is not site specific, the code change.
Thank you, Sam. Any other planning commission members have comments or questions at this point? Bryce, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Booth, currently there's an accessory use in the light industrial. So all of those items are still, they're already approved in the code. So what we're changing here would be the ability to have a commercial flight, as the gentleman described, and the ability to refuel at his facility, correct?
That's correct.
So given the fact that I've had a conversation with the airport manager, the FAA permits are in place, special use permit would still need to come before the Planning Commission for our review and approval, I could support this code change based on that.
Thank you, Bryce. Tom, did you have your hand up and want to make a comment?
Yeah, just one. And I think the special use permit process is what's going to govern, each specific site. So what this does in code, Maureen, is allow light industrial areas, which is mainly around the airport. There is another light industrial area down here off of Sawmill, off of Pine Nut Road. Those are the two areas in Douglas County that would allow this type of business. Mr. Noransky's business is the only one currently operating under this, which actually, when he first put that business in, actually modified code at that time to allow it. And so that's, and all he's doing now is updating the code part so that then the special use permit will have to come back, be modified accordingly. And then if any other business wants to create a heliport in a light industrial zone, they will have to come forward with a special use permit as well.
Thank you, Tom. Anybody else for comments or questions at this point? I would just note in the packet, as Sam Booth mentioned at the start of his presentation, on packet page 46 and 47 are the 4 findings that are necessary to be made for a zoning text amendment. So on this particular issue, if you support the making of those 4 findings, then you could vote in the affirmative. If you can't, if you believe that one or more of those findings can't be met, then you would be inclined to vote against the zoning text amendment. So with that said, if there's no further discussion, I would be looking for a motion. The motion, if Sam, you could put that up on the screen, or if you can refer to packet page 43, that would be the appropriate motion if someone is inclined to make that motion at this point. Bryce,
Mr. Chairman, Bryce Klutz for the record. I move to recommend approval of ordinance 2020-1570 to the Board of County Commissioners to amend DCC section 20.668.280 based on the staff report, required findings, presentation, and public comment.
Thank you, Bryce. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Christie seconds the motion. So the motion before us is approval of the ordinance. Is there discussion on approval of the ordinance? Seeing no discussion on approval of the ordinance, I'll call the roll. Again, this is Bryce's motion, seconded by Christie, to approve ordinance 2020-1570. We'll call the roll. Christie?
Aye.
Bryce?
Aye.
Dave?
Aye.
Mark?
Aye.
Brian?
Aye.
Maureen?
Nay, I don't believe the proposed amendment is compatible with the actual and master plan use of the adjacent properties.
Okay, that would be item number C. Thank you very much. And the chair would vote aye. So in this vote, there's 6 ayes and 1 nay, with Maureen being the nay. So the motion is agreed to. We'll now move on to agenda item 2. And I'll read agenda item 2 into the record. For possible action, discussion on ordinance 2020-1571 to amend section 20.660.020 of the Douglas County Code relative to commercial and business service uses in order to revise standards for pet services within commercial and industrial zoning districts and provide uniformity for certain aspects of pet kennel facilities within Douglas County and other properly related matters. Sam, you may start the presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sam Booth, again for the record. This is item number 2. And to give you some background on this item, in 2019, the applicant inquired about locating a dog daycare facility within the GC General Commercial Zoning District within the town of Gardnerville. And staff and the applicant had a discussion about their proposed use for the site and their specific business, and decided that that best fit into the allowed definition within code of a pet service. And so at that point, the applicant applied for and received approval of a design review, as well as a minor variance on a rear setback for the business at their location, which is 1267 Highway 395, Gardnerville. Additionally, that approval that was done included a condition that the business could not have any, or could not include any overnight boarding of animals. And that is based in the definition of a pet service and some unique descriptions in code. And I can just kind of walk the commission through those. But currently, Douglas County Code defines a pet service as any single person, entity, or group engaged in grooming, training pets, primarily dogs and cats, for commercial purposes at any residence or other location in Douglas County. A veterinary clinic or hospital is excluded from this provision. And then there's 2 items under that definition that have further requirements. So one is for the setback requirements, and also number 2 is that pet service is subject to compliance with the provisions of Title VI of Douglas County Code, which the Animal Services Department is in charge of reviewing Title VI and issuing permits there. Oh, I think I have 2 of the same. Excuse me here. Let's see. So the applicant had pointed out, so after we added that condition to their permit, since then the applicant has pointed out that Tahoe Basin regulations in Douglas County Code have a definition for animal services, just slightly different than pet services, and that its description does include allowances for overnight boarding services. And so you can see that there, almost the same definition, performing services for animals, animal hospitals, animal grooming, pet sitting, and to include overnight boarding services. Additionally, they provided me with some information from Carson City, and I followed up on that, and that Carson City's zoning code does include a definition for a kennel, which includes overnight boarding and allows animals to be boarded within the definition for a kennel. That use is allowed in the general industrial, general commercial, and limited industrial zoning districts. It's also allowed with a conditional use permit, which is similar to our special use permit process within the single family 5-acre zoning and also within the retail commercial zoning districts. So the point being made by the applicant is that there are at least one definition within Douglas County Code, albeit it's within the Tahoe Basin, that does allow boarding. And I should have added that that is allowed within the mixed-use commercial and the tourist commercial areas of Tahoe. There are 2 businesses we know of there in the State Line area and at the bottom of Kingsbury that are a pet service that do overnight boarding. And additionally, there are several businesses in Carson City that operate as a boarding facility in a commercial zoning district. So the proposed changes to to the code by the applicant, and this is with some discussion with staff, but the applicant is proposing to add that pet services be allowed in commercial and industrial zoning districts to include overnight boarding. So this proposed change here is showing you those two code revisions that I previously discussed, and adding in the third one there, saying that it would be allowed for overnight boarding in just commercial and industrial zoning districts only. And then I do have an image of the code use table for the commercial zoning district, so you can see where it is or where it isn't allowed. And so the D that's shown in the table there is for design review. That's a staff level review, but essentially means that it is permitted with that, subject to that staff level review. That's within the neighborhood commercial, the general commercial, mixed use commercial, tourist commercial, light industrial, and service industrial zoning districts. So when we discussed this with the applicant, we didn't think that it was appropriate to allow overnight boarding within residential areas. Pet service is allowed within some residential zoning districts. Didn't think it was appropriate there. So we're just adding in the definition commercial and industrial zoning districts. So once again, I have described a response for each of the 4 findings in your staff report, and that is on pages 61 through 62. Do believe the findings can be made to approve this text amendment. The proposed change would be consistent with allowances within the zoning code in the Tahoe Basin, as well as Carson City. And the use would require community development to still review any application with a design review, as well as a permit from Douglas County Animal Services. And would just additionally note that I reached out to the Animal Services supervisor, Liz Begovich, and she reviewed these proposed changes, agreed with them, didn't have any objection to the proposed changes to the code. And once again, Mr. Chairman would just say that the applicant, Stacy Kitzmiller and Ken Swanson, are on the line for any questions.
Very good, Sam. Thank you very much. Stacy, would you like to make any comments at this point? Or if not, we'll go to questions or comments from the Planning Commission members.
What do you think? Well, hi, everybody. I just feel like, first and foremost, I'm a dog lover, and I just wanted to offer service to the community. We're cage-free. We have a full camera system. I'm 1,000% transparent. It's a fun, safe space. Even the antisocial dogs get their time outside, and I just, above everything, I just want to be a good service for the community. And
Stacy, you're breaking up just a little bit. Maybe you can stop and start again. Colleen, would you like Stacy to sign off and come back to us, or do we want to just bear with her for a minute?
Maybe give her a chance to get back on. Maybe we could ask questions to the group.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, that's great. Stacy, go right ahead.
I don't know where I lost y'all, but I just was saying that basically I just want to be a part of the community and take good care of your dogs and have a fun, safe space. That's my whole goal behind the Holiday Inn.
Great. Thank you very much, Stacy. Okay, we'll take it back to the Planning Commission members. Any members have questions or comments on this for either Brian or for either Sam or for Stacy?
I have a question.
Maureen, go ahead.
How many dogs are we talking about that are attending daycare or might be boarded overnight?
You know what? Before the COVID-19 happened, I was doing between 18 and about 25 dogs a day. Overnight boarding, is my initial paperwork said 8. So 8 dogs for overnight boarding.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments? Sam Booth, did you have something? And then Sam Taylor, maybe?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just add to Maureen's question that the permit from Animal Services will also specify the number of animals. And in talking with the Animal Services supervisor, they have a square footage per animal that's required for boarding and holding of the animal. So, you know, based on their review of the building itself and the square footage that's available, they'll limit that permit to a certain number. And then that's, you know, that's based on the building size or the storage boarding areas themselves.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sam Taylor, did you have something else to add?
Yeah, it was just a reminder that perhaps everybody could identify themselves when they start to speak at the very beginning. It'll help for the minutes. Thanks.
Thank you. Other Planning Commission members seeking recognition? Christy, go ahead.
I'd just like to say a use like this is tremendously useful and needed. So I'm glad to see we're bringing something like this forward.
Thank you, Christy. Anybody else on the Planning Commission? Okay. If there's no other comments or questions, then again, as Sam mentioned, the requirements are in your packet, and the motion is on page 51. And as I said, the findings for the zoning text amendment are on page 61 and 62 of the packet. So I'd be looking for someone to make a motion on this at this point. Maureen?
Okay, I will, this is Maureen for the record. I'll recommend approval of ordinance 2020-1571 to the Board of County Commissioners to amend DCC section 20.66D.020 based on the staff report, required findings, presentation, and public comment.
Thank you, Maureen. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Christy seconds the motion. So it's been moved and seconded approval of ordinance 2020-1571. Is there a discussion? Okay, seeing no discussion, then I'll call for a vote. All those in favor will vote aye. All those opposed will vote no. Christy?
Aye.
Bryce?
Aye.
Dave?
Aye.
Mark?
Aye.
Brian?
Aye.
Maureen?
Aye.
And the chair votes aye. So this vote is 7-0. It's unanimous for approval of the motion. So now we'll move to agenda item 3, and this is for discussion only, and I will read it into the record. This is on packet page 65. For discussion only, review of housing needs and availability in Douglas County by community development staff. As the Planning Commission considers future master plan amendments and zoning map amendments, there is a need to base decisions on reliable data on previously approved housing, the status of current building, and future needs. Up-to-date information on subdivisions, planned unit developments, vested projects, and building permits issued is needed and will assist the Planning Commission in evaluating new projects and proposing solutions to our housing needs. And as indicated in the packet, I asked that this subject be placed on our agenda today. In several past meetings, most recently at our meeting on April 14th, Planning Commission members have cited a need for accurate data on the status of housing as we consider proposed new housing and future updates of the master plan. I've asked planning staff to begin the presentation, then we will hear from real estate professionals and the home building industry. We will then move to comments and questions from the Planning Commission. Sam, if you would start us off.
Okay, thanks once again, Mr. Chairman. This is Sam Booth for the record. Tom and I, Tom, our community development director, have put together some information on our building permits and building allocations. In the packet we uploaded yesterday as supplemental, our staff Douglas County subdivision list as well as vested projects list. This includes tracking of each subdivision, vested or otherwise, the number of units that were approved originally, the lots that have been recorded that have a final map that actually created those lots, and then the number of lots that are built out and then units remaining. So as you start on the left side of that table and move to the right, you can see the progression there. Excuse me, and I'll just see if I can share a screen quickly here just to run through that for everyone. Okay, so you can see the name of the subdivision. This is on the vested projects list. And just to recap again, I know we've discussed this stuff before, but vested projects were any projects that were in place prior to the growth management ordinance being approved in 2007. And so the name of the subdivision is there. You may see some details there. Those are typically just for staff tracking of the different portions of those subdivision. And then as you move across the table, you can see what community area it's in, the year it's approved. And we see the total number of units that were approved. Would note that the president for the Chichester HOA reached out to us and questioned this 764 number. I'm glad Beth was able to see our upload. She says Chichester has 778 homes built out, and we reviewed the vested resolution that was originally approved by the commissioners for that. And so I'll reach out to Beth to discuss that. I think there was a discrepancy with the phases, the last phases coming on, but we both agree on there only being one lot remaining in that subdivision there. So if anybody has any further information about any of these subdivisions on the list, feel free to reach out to me to question the numbers that we've got here. But we feel pretty strongly about these. So you can see the lots remaining to be built within these subdivisions on the far right. So the total out of all vested projects is 2601. The next sheet of this table, these are subdivisions that aren't subject, weren't approved prior to the growth management ordinance. So they are subject to requiring a growth management allocation, building allocation. When they come in and apply for a building permit, they also have to apply for an allocation. And we've discussed previously how those allocations are capped each year, but they have to apply for those and they're subject to availability. So you can see the project names again, the same type of thing, the lots remaining on the far right. At the bottom right of the table there, you can see there's 1,622 lots remaining in these subdivisions. The caveat that I always try to discuss when I can, when we talk about these, are that there's the total number of units that were approved with the subdivision when it came forward to the Planning Commission and to the commissioners to get approval. That number of units. As that development of that subdivision progresses, the developer has to bring forward a final map to record and create those lots. And those are subject to expiration and recording timelines. So the lots aren't actually there and available to be built on until the developer has progressed far enough and their engineering has been done and those type of things to be able to get that final map and bring that forward to the courthouse to record and create the lots. So we can say that these are the number of units approved, but really to me, you can't go and build on any of those until they're actually created and recorded as a lot. And so that's the next column over. And then of course, once those lots are recorded, then we're tracking how many homes are being built on those lots. Essentially, that's just a high level overview of this table. If you have any questions, feel free to let me know. We also have uploaded our allocation, residential allocation tracking table that shows the number of allocations to be given out in a year. Those numbers were all created with the growth management ordinance. back in 2007. There's a number of allocations to be distributed each year. After the 300 number here, we can start in 2007. There's a total number. After that is accounting for vesting, and it's reduced by 47%. So that gives us the available allocations we have to distribute in each year. That's 168 for this 2007. The ordinance describes breaking that 168 out between 70% going to individual allocations and 30% going to project allocations. The individual allocations are for anything that's not a subdivision or not a planned development. So that would be 4 lots or less typically. And a project are subdivision or planned developments. And so there much fewer are available for projects. I'll let Tom discuss a little bit further. He's put together some tables discussing these numbers and how they've progressed over time. But I just wanted to show you what these 2 tables mean. And again, we uploaded those as supplemental yesterday.
Go ahead, Tom, if you wanted to start your part now.
I gotta unmute. That helps. Can everybody see my screen? So, so this is the building permits and where we're at today. You know, as far as April 2020, and this is the table we shared with the county commissioners in 2018. We've updated the information now, showing the the kind of a decline since 2018 on the permits. So 66 permits issued, through April of this year. That's where we're at. Last year we had 154, and then 2018 we had 235. And of course, this is going to be important as on the next couple of slides, just to see where we've been. 672 was the most permits that, these are single family residential permits that we've been able to issue, in any given year. So we went back to 2000, track that. It's a nice timeline showing that information. This one we've got also provided, it shows the individual numbers of residential only permits. And then the red line here starts, this is the allocation that's been issued. So you can see in 2007, we started with 317. So the carryover and the area underneath between this line here, the blue line, which shows the residential permits, and the red line showing the actual allocations available, the difference there is the excess. And that's the 2% growth line. This is the red line here, is the 2% growth line. And you can see since 2007, when the ordinance went into place, we issued 224 permits. The next year was 69, and we've been down pretty low. So the growth rate then for the county is substantially less than the 2% is what, which is what the growth management ordinance has stated that the county can grow at. We've also got just a list. Basically, this is the same thing that we just charted. You've got the residential permits issued based on a calendar year, and then the residential allocations distributed. This is just a table view, not with the chart. And then here's another chart showing all of those areas that Sam discussed. I tried to make them the same so we can look at the table. And basically this is just a graph view. So if you come over here, we added 2 more columns to that chart that Sam was discussing, the individual and projects combined, the used permits, and then the excess pool, showing those from 2007 to 2020. And then what that's showing is you've got the gray area here, the line. This is the actual excess permits growing. The 1,300 is the green line. Sorry, back and forth here. The 1,375, you see the individual allocation pool, and then the vested allocation pool or project allocation pool is in the blue. So the green line and the blue line correspond here. The green line, individual. And it says down here on the bottom, individual allocation pool, project allocation pool. And then this is the vested or the distributed allocations per year. This is the line where it's at. These are the ones that are inclusive. So if we didn't use them, it's this little chart, this little area between the red line and the blue line is the area which is providing these differences on all of our permits here. So that's the project allocation pool, the individual pool, and then the combined distributed allocations, or I'm sorry, individual and project excess pool is that one there. So that's just basically adding the blue line and the green line together to get the gray line. Is that, you guys have any questions on this? It's a little more complicated, but I think that the topic itself is definitely difficult to comprehend, but the difference in the area here between the red line and the blue line, or the light blue line, is really what is creating the slope on these three lines here, if that makes any sense. Yeah, Bryce.
If we could go ahead with a couple of quick questions now. I'd like everybody to save their questions if we can. If you have something specific for Tom, go ahead, Bryce or Maureen, and then if we could do the other presentations, and then we can group all of our questions collectively. That might be the best way. But go ahead, Bryce, if you had a quick question there.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Tom, just very quick, in layman's terms, what is the delta, the number or the two numbers between what is available to build and what's been approved to build? Out of those 5 numbers, can you just help me understand that delta? What's the number of projects that could be built tomorrow if they had a building permit?
That was on Sam's original slide, showing all the subdivisions that have been approved. That doesn't include parcels that are existing, right? I don't think we've tracked that, Sam, like existing parcels that could be built today on a vacant 2-acre or 1-acre lot out in Johnson Lane, or a 5-acre lot out in East Valley. There's a lot of vacancies still available. The only thing that subdivision, that list of subdivisions, is actual projects that have been approved with the number of units at the tentative map stage, and then it shows what's been actually recorded today. So that was on Sam's.
Tom, I think what I understood from Bryce's question was on your previous slide where you show the allocation table. There you go. And so I think, regardless of the number of, we talk about this all the time, the number of subdivision units that are approved and that are out there and available, they're subject to needing, unless it's a vested project, it's subject to needing one of these allocations. And so the total number would be 628 if you look at the blue column, the project pool. So any developer that wanted to come in and pull building permits in any year, first of all, they would have to draw down on that pool of 628. And then we would get to the available allocations for that year, which given out each year in 2020 is 65 allocations. So there's only 628 allocations available for any subdivision. Now, there's quite a few more in the individual allocation pool, which is the green column, 1,375. And that's, again, because that 70% split going to individual versus 30% split going to project. So the individual ones are just, if anyone, like Tom said, there are some lots in the Ranchos, in Johnson Lane, in those areas that are older lots, not part of a subdivision. If somebody bought that lot and just wanted to go build a custom house there, they would require an individual allocation. And there's 1,375, quite a few of those available. But all of these projects that we're discussing have to draw out of this blue pool, and there's only 628 of those available.
So if I understand you correct, Sam, are you saying that 216 homes could be built in 2020 if they were all approved and ready to go? Is that correct?
Well, and if that was including individuals and both projects, and that's for 1 year. It will or could be more than that because we have a pool. And so you can draw out of that pool until that pool gets to 0. Then we would get back to the distributed allocations. The important thing I like to point out, I know we hear a lot of comments about the allocation pool and the units that are in there, that those should be wiped out at the end of each year, that we shouldn't have allocations remaining carrying into the next year. The point is, as Tom showed on his graphs about the fact that we've never used the available allocations that are there, that red line is illustrating the 2% growth cap that the voters, decided to institute. And we've never met that 2% growth. So my point is, those available allocations are still under that red line. So they're in the pool, they can be used. But it's not that if we use those allocations and built out 600 homes in 1 year, we'd exceed 2% growth for that year. But on average, we're not allowed to exceed 2% over the life of the growth management program. So the point is, you could have a year, yes, where you had 4% growth, but it averages itself back out because, as we saw, the first 10 years or so of the allocations here were in the recession, as that was instituted in 2007, and we didn't have any building going on. So we had 0.5% growth or 0.3% growth, very, very low. If you wipe those allocations off the table, now you're not talking about a 2% growth cap, you're talking about a 1% growth cap or a 0.8% growth cap. And I don't think that's what the voters considered when they approved this. So I think that is something that has to go back on the ballot, to redo the allocation table, essentially. So we're just in charge of, making these allocations available in each given year, based on whether it's a project or an individual development.
Thank you, Sam. What I'd like to do is move forward with our next 2 presentations, and then we'll have questions that you can ask of the staff or the other 2 individuals. So our next presentation will be from Bill Driscoll. Bill has over 35 years of experience living and working in the Carson Valley and was previously fire chief of the East Fork Fire and paramedic districts. So Bill, if you would go ahead, you can unmute yourself, or if Colleen needs to do that, and then make your presentation. Thank you.
Okay, I think I'm unmuted. Mr. Chairman, and thank you, members of the committee or commission, for asking me for my input. I've been in real estate for over 20 years. I was a fire chief for 15. But the Douglas County housing market is strong. We have 3 major market areas: the Lake, South County, which is the Topaz, Holbrook, Spring Valley area, and of course the Carson Valley. I see no indication whatsoever that there is going to be any decline in our home values. The COVID-19 issue may slow down listings and it may slow down sales, but as soon as the social distancing is over, we're going to move forward just as we have. People move to the Carson Valley mainly for quality of life. The people that are moving here are generally semi-retired, retired, or earn their living through investments. They just don't work here. Up at the lake, 70% of those residences are non-owner occupied. They're rentals, they're seasonal specific, or owned by old families. Okay, the people that leave the Carson Valley for a couple of reasons. One is they're getting older, they want to live closer to family, or the family wants them to live closer to them. Or they don't like the cold winters. And in some cases, it's a change of employment. I've been asked to pass up on the Tahoe, but anyway, for the past several years, the inventory of Carson Valley and Douglas County, South County, has been rather limited. In other words, when we talk about supply and demand, there's more demand than there is supply. So that concept is keeping our home values up. Often contentious but important issue is the issue that many people that work here in the Valley, county employees, fire district employees, the people that work in retail and offices, can't afford to buy property. They have to live outside the county. Right now, the mean sales price of a Carson Valley house is a little over $419,000. That's a lot of money. And on another issue, it's extremely difficult, as you know, for ranching and farming to sustain itself. And as it happened in Reno and as it's happening in the Carson Valley or Carson City, the ranches are selling out to development. The last ranch in Carson City was a Lompa Ranch, and it recently sold out to development. Okay. Our incredible views and quality of life is let me go back to the ranching. One of the issues on ranching is Douglas County is a right to farm county. In other words, anytime a piece of property sells in the Carson Valley, that buyer has to sign a document acknowledging that we have farming operations and that under certain circumstances, they can't file a complaint against those operations. Well, many people don't remember signing it, and the bottom line is the interface between residential and agricultural often presents controversies and, well, just like the one that's in court right now for the slaughterhouse. There's those that argue that it's agricultural, should be here. And of course, those people who bought the house on ranches, they no, we don't want a slaughterhouse. So I really think that the county commission has to clear that up. We're either agricultural or we're not. And we can't be one or the other. We need to be both. They need to clear that up. And I'd like to see the county, our taxpayers, the commission, and you ladies and gentlemen, come together as one force to maintain the quality and the rural lifestyle that we have in Douglas County, respecting fairness, private property rights with planned growth that will cause our local businesses to sustain themselves. Being in business, in a retail business in Carson Valley is tough. And with them all having to close down, that makes it tougher. And we need growth to get quality business. It's just, that's the way it is. And I have put in the packet, I hope you have it for you. I wasn't sure whether I was going to be presenting something or whether you were just going to go on the packet. But as of April of this year, the median sold price of a house is $419,500. 62 were sold in April, and that is a 12% reduction over last year. Days on the market, that is from the time the contract is signed until it closes escrow, about 38 days, which isn't bad based on national averages. And we got 66 new listings, and we have an inventory of 150. That's not very many homes on the market. Interestingly enough, we have over 200 real estate agents in the Carson Valley. So we have more agents than we have inventory. The Tahoe market is interesting because one sale can skew things in a large direction one way or the other. If we look at the chart that I have in front of you, single-family home sales, the total number of sales, it's a 5-year chart. And you can see that in 2019, we had a peak, and then it's gone down from there. That's the number of sales, and that is reflected to a greater degree about what we have available. Now, the last chart I'd like you to look at is the median sold price, and that tells you the whole story. Go back to 2014, it was about 275, 250. For the same house today, we're looking at $419,500. So some say we're pricing ourselves out of the market, but the market is what it is. It's going to do what it's going to do. We have a beautiful place to live. People want to come here. I think the virus issue and the social distancing, when that's over, I think we're going to see an influx of people wanting to come here even more than we do. Most people coming here, of course, are coming from California, but they come from all over the country to get here. So with that, I have opened it up for any questions.
Thank you very much, Bill. We appreciate the presentation. And if we can hold the questions until the last presenter makes their comments, and then we'll move with questions from individual peoples. Go ahead, Brandon. You are a home builder. Your office is in Minden, and you are on the board of directors of the Nevada Builders Alliance. So please share your thoughts.
Yeah, thank you, Bill. I do have a presentation prepared. If you could share the screen.
Colleen or Sam, are you able to bring that up for Brandon?
Yes, this is Sam. Hang on just a second. Okay.
Right, Sam, is this coming on your screen or looks like?
What was that? Can you see the first page?
I can see your screen. Can you transfer controls to my screen?
No, I don't think I can.
All right, I'll have.
Oh, I think. Oh, so are you wanting to? Sorry, are you wanting to share the screen, Brandon?
Yes.
Was that's what you were saying? Okay, I was sharing. Hold on. Yep. Okay, Colleen will give you access here. I think you can share your screen now.
You can all see my screen now?
Not yet, Brendan. If it's easier, Sam can go ahead and share his, or you can just prompt him to switch slides.
Okay, we should be live now.
There you go.
There you go.
Great, thank you. Again, for the record, Brandon Hill speaking on behalf of the Nevada Builders Alliance as a board member and also as a regional home builder. I also want to recognize with us on the Zoom meeting is Aaron West. Aaron currently serves as the CEO of the Nevada Builders Alliance. We appreciate this invitation by the Planning Commission to present current industry insight into market conditions and challenges. I wanted to take just a few moments and speak to some of the unique experiences we're having as an industry in Northern Nevada as we are adversely impacted by COVID-19, although we are still able to operate as a necessary shelter providing industry and business. Construction operations have continued, albeit more slowly, with logistical complications surrounding precautionary social distancing measures in place. For example, it used to take cabinet deliveries used to be 4 to 6 weeks out. Now we're talking 8 to 9 weeks out for cabinet lead times, just as one anecdotal example. We're still in Northern Nevada, we're still experiencing labor shortages in the industry. I think because of the fiscal stimulus that people have received, in addition to enhanced unemployment benefits, we haven't seen a lot of people transition from, for example, the hospitality industry, where there is a lot of current unemployment, to construction to help alleviate the shortages on the labor side. We're still seeing those. So that was a challenge coming into the COVID-19 world here in construction and the housing industry, and continues to be a challenge. New sales have been the most impacted part of our business in the industry during what would normally be the busiest part of the annual spring and summer selling season. We estimate that we're doing about 25% of the sales we would normally be doing if it were not for COVID-19 and this new unique reality. Thankfully, our backlog of buyers and contract have mostly stayed with us, with the builders through this crisis, and many are even starting to close on those homes and those transactions. One huge indicator of pent-up demand that's really giving us some optimism as an industry is the amount of online traffic we're seeing. Virtual visits to building websites and other online real estate platforms is up over 60%. Given this and other leading indicators, we're optimistic that the expected strong selling season has just been pushed back 2 to 3 months due to COVID-19. But setting aside the temporary impacts of COVID-19, when we look across the various submarkets of Northern Nevada, specifically into Douglas County, we see some more troubling structural concerns in the market related to the lack of available and affordable housing stock. Douglas County has an affordability crisis, plain and simple. When you look at the median income of Douglas County compared to the United States, median household income tracks very closely to the national average, just over $60,000 per year for the average household income. However, the median home price in Douglas County is almost double that of the national average, at almost $350,000 versus the national average of $204,000. This causes some real issues when it comes to, trying to find housing for people who live and serve within Douglas County. When you think of trying to recruit teachers, sheriff deputies, firefighters, other people that work in the service sector, the hospitality sector, construction industry, finding affordable housing stock in Douglas County is not an option for most of the buyers who would want to live in Douglas County, who live in Douglas County. So we're seeing a lot of teachers and other people in those good paying jobs, but around the median income, being forced to live in Carson City, Reno, Dayton, those markets where they're having to drive in, and that's creating and exacerbating traffic impacts on Highway 395 north and south. I know one of the concerns about, if we build more houses, that's going to translate to more traffic, but at the same time, by not having housing where people work, that also creates peak hour traffic demands on Highway 395, for example, that wouldn't nearly be as bad otherwise. So anyway, just moving on, just to give you an example of what the median household income, what the median household in Douglas County can afford, assuming they have a decent credit score of 680 or above, they have moderate level of debt, with credit card, say a credit card and a car payment totaling $600 a month, you know, looking at a $335,000 home, you know, what's available in or around that price category right now? If you were to look on the multiple listing service, MLS, what's available? 8. There are 8 listings in all of Carson Valley. What do they look like? Well, mobile home, a home in the Johnson Lane area that's completely off the utility grid, not connected to anything. 1,000 square foot home in the Ranchos, or a condo. These are just examples of the limited amount of what's available in terms of housing stock to satisfy the median household income in Douglas County. Why do homes in Douglas County cost so much? You know, I put together just an example of a typical home in a subdivision in the Carson Valley and what those costs look like, you know, from this perspective of a builder. You know, what are those costs? You know, a finished subdivision lot, and we're talking not a custom home lot, we're talking in a, you know, where there are economies of scale and you can buy a number of lots at a you know, the best price available in the market in Douglas County. You know, you might be able to find, you know, get into a deal for finished lot subdivision costs, finished lots of $120,000 each. You're going to pay about $5,000 on average for design, $11,000 in water rights, water connection fees, another $5,000, another $5,000 for sewer connection fees, building permits, $7,000, construction hard costs for a home this size are going to be about $325,000. And again, these costs are not reflective of, you know, a custom home might be double that because they don't have the economies of scale of a larger builder. So for a production project-based builder, the construction hard costs for 2,500 square foot home, the vertical construction costs are barely within reach of that median household income, let alone the cost of the land and all the soft costs that go into paying for permits. And of course, the builder has to be able to pay their staff and their office, you know, the builder has overhead and has to make a reasonable profit to even be in business. So when you look at a, you know, a market price home for a home like this in Douglas County, that might cost $568,000. Well out of reach of the median household income in Douglas County. Taking a step back, I want to look a little bit about the finished lot inventory, because as an industry, as a builder, looking at Douglas County, you know, some might say, hey, there are a ton of finished lots out there. Why aren't we building on those finished lots before we develop more lots or before we approve more subdivisions? I just wanted to give a realistic perspective from a builder, from the industry, what that looks like. I took you know, the reports that Sam Booth was showing earlier, provided by Community Development, and I tallied up all those projects that have finished lots without a home having been built or a permit pulled yet. So this graph represents all those finished lots out there that, you know, if you owned a lot and had an approved design and approved plan, you could go and pull a permit and build on that lot. Well, of those, 914 of those, or 86% of those lots, finished lots in Douglas County, are valued at over $200,000. Many of them valued over $400,000. That's Clear Creek, that's Eagle Ridge, that's Jones Peak. There's a lot of those are out even Grandview estates out in the East Valley. If you're buying a $200,000 lot, a builder, you're building a home that's going to be over $900,000. In most cases, well over $1 million. So how many lots can you get for under $150,000? Right now, the inventory of finished lots in Douglas County, including multifamily lots, townhomes, condos, and single-family detached, that total inventory is about 150 lots, or 14% of the total inventory of finished lots. And all of those are by builders currently and will be built out over the next 1 to 2 years.
No, planning commission meeting, we got some presenters going right now.
Now, looking at the total remaining approved units, this is the total list of vested projects that were approved with entitlements prior to 2002 in the slow growth ordinance, as well as projects approved subsequent. There's 4,500 in total, and you'll see that a small percentage of those have actually been approved. In fact, the majority, 52% of those lots have not been improved. They're sitting in an unimproved status where they may be still needing a tentative map approval, probably needing design plans approved. They still require, many of those still require discretionary approval. So they're not truly fully approved because many of them will have to have further discretionary approvals from the Board of Commissioners, for example. You know, someone might look at this total list of 4,500 units and say, hey, you know, we have, you know, tons of inventory. We don't need to approve any more projects. The problem is one of feasibility. If these 4,500 units, many of which have been on the books for decades, were feasible, they would have already been built out and developed. I mean, you take 2012 to 2018, or until pre-COVID, you had a very robust market, yet the peak number of permits pulled in any of those years was just over 200 permits. Well, why haven't those projects been approved? Well, a lot of reasons. Part of it has to do with very onerous conditions of approval that have been placed upon those projects. You know, as a builder looking at the inventory of lots that are approved on the books for Douglas County, and I start to look into those to see about the feasibility of acquisition and development, since they're already on the books, they've already gone through that gauntlet of approvals. And then I start to look at the conditions of approval to either, for example, develop sections of Muller Parkway or Hayborn Meadows, or building a roadway through a bridge over a floodplain, for example. Those type of things create onerous economic conditions and create feasibility, not just feasibility challenges, what I call non-starters on the feasibility side. So while we have a lot of approved units on the books, that doesn't mean we have feasible approved units on the books. I want to make sure from an industry perspective, that's clear to the Planning Commission. How do we solve this affordability crisis, this major gap between what, call it the working class in Douglas County can afford and what the actual pricing is? We need to approve projects designed for attainable housing. Attainable housing, to distinguish that from affordable, attainable housing is something that the average or median household income can afford. Yeah, you might say that's affordable. I call it attainable to not confuse it with the technical definition of affordable, which is subsidized housing. So we need more attainable housing. How can you do that? We need increased density and height in some locations. Now, if we're going to maintain our rural character, which is super important in Douglas County, we're not going to allow 45-foot heights and 3- and 4-story buildings anywhere in the county. Obviously not. But there are some locations, maybe locations that are already approved in the master plan for multifamily high-density residential, where we may need to look at increase it instead of 16 units to the acre, for example, maybe 20 units to the acre. Instead of 35 feet, maybe 40 feet, maybe 45 feet. Sometimes additional height is actually helpful in architectural design to meet with rural character and design within it. So increased allowed density will allow more townhome projects, more high density projects, because the cost of land is so high. That's the only way to bring down the cost to be able to deliver a home to, call it attainable homes. And also, it's important to approve projects within or adjacent to existing utility service boundaries. A number of the projects on the books that are, so-called approved one of the reasons why they're not feasible, why they've never been developed, is they're so far outside the existing utility service boundaries. Those utility connections and those impacts, not only on the development, but potentially on the utility service provider, are so significant that they can never be underwritten and actually finance investment and develop. So those are some of the things I wanted to share with you from an industry perspective. Really appreciate this opportunity to present, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Brandon. We appreciate the presentation. What I'd like to do now is go forward with discussion or questions, and rather than going piece by piece, maybe we can just move right down the line. If we can start with Maureen and then go to Brian, Mark, Dave, Bryce, and Christy. If we have enough time, we can maybe come back for additional questions after everybody's had one chance. If people can try and take maybe 5 or 10 minutes with questions of any of the staff or of the two participants. So with that, Maureen, would you like to start off?
Yes, Maureen Casey for the record. I have a lot of questions, but I really want to thank staff for the updated numbers, Brandon for his time to give us the industry perspective. And honestly, I think I'll hold my questions and just comment that I think this is something that we could discuss with the Board of Commissioners in a joint meeting, because a lot of these things being proposed by Mr. Hill are policy decisions that come from the Board of Commissioners. But again, I want to thank everyone for their contributions to this study session.
Thank you, Maureen. Brian, would you like to go ahead?
Well, yeah, I have to say we hired an employee here at my firm, and unfortunately, he just purchased his house in Dayton. He looked around here, and to buy anything under the 350, which is basically what his pricing was, pretty much impossible unless he was going to buy something that he was going to have to fix and put a lot of money in before he could even live in it. We have a lot of aging homes, and the new homes aren't cheap here in Douglas County. Looking to Mr. Hill, how do you guys build homes, and get it under that 350? Because, $225 a square foot, that sounds cheap from what I'm hearing from the contractors down here. Granted, I am hearing from, the smaller guys, not the guys that, scaled the operations, but that's a lot of what's building down here. And, I'm hearing $250 and $260 a square foot as the cost of building right now. So how do you guys get homes, and what can we do to help, possibly bring in homes that can get us under 350,000?
Great question. Thank you. So the most important things we can do, I think, first and foremost, is there are a number of approved projects on the books that still require further discretionary approvals, projects that are going to come before the Planning Commission, either as a subdivision proposal, as a PD or plan development proposal, or some combination thereof. Projects that are already in receiving areas, projects already adjacent to urban service boundaries. And these projects, many of them are going to have higher density components to them, or smaller lot sizes associated with them. Market pricing for lots and for approved land that's zoned for development, that is what it is. And given the limited supply, that price is going to continue to remain very high. So in order to bring that cost down, the price of the final product, we have to have higher density. That's the easiest solution. And also when we have projects that are of some scale, we can also bring down the cost of construction. When you're talking about vertical costs of construction over $200 a square foot, that is typical of custom home building, because there are no economies of scale. In the industry, you really don't start getting economies of scale on the production side until you have upwards of 50 units. And really those economies of scale for cost-wise become material over 100 or 150 units. And I know Douglas County has to balance, huge master plan communities against preserving our rural character. They don't have to be mutually exclusive. We can approve projects and maintain our rural character and heritage. In fact, sometimes allowing some projects facilitates the preservation of open space, for example. So, and preserves premium viewshed corridors by the transfer of development rights in that program. So again, projects with higher density, allowing those projects approving tentative subdivision maps and plan development projects that are, for projects, again, currently on the books. There are receiving areas right now that don't have an approved project on them, but are infill areas within the county. Approving developments in those infill receiving areas. Again, that's another way, not increasing or enlarging the urban service boundary. You're not creating urban sprawl, but yet those are very good opportunities where you can allow appropriate densities to achieve attainable housing.
Well, yeah, and I mean, I do, kind of agree, but I have to say that you can't, just put high density and expect low costs. Coming from Southern California, my parents bought a 6,000 square foot lot for $200,000 or $210,000 with a house on it. Sold it 10 years later for $700,000. Just creating a smaller lot does not create a cheaper house. We kind of got to look at possibly new innovation, related to building as well. I think I mentioned it to Sam. I've seen out there they've done some 3D printing and some possible things there that could help drive down costs possibly as well. But those are things that are in the future. And, I think we just have to be prepared for any of those that strike up and, can really decrease the cost of this housing. Because, I mean, I'm sorry to say, but I don't think, making the smaller lots is really going to help. I think really it's something that's going to have to help in, basically nationwide, not just Douglas County. That's all I have.
And well taken. I will tell you, one of the things that we're doing as a company and as an industry, one of our sister companies is called Key Structures, and actually based out of Pueblo, Colorado. It's a modular plant where they, and I wouldn't want to confuse that with mobile home building, but where you're actually taking modules of a home and building those out almost to completion, shipping them out to a site where you're placing them on a foundation that's been built in place, but you're able to build it faster, less expensive from a material and labor perspective because you're able to save on material and labor. Your quality is also improved because you're building in a controlled environment. And the quality of these homes, once in place, most people could not even recognize after the fact that they were, the majority of construction actually took place in a plant. So as an industry and as a company, that I'm involved with specifically, we are looking at ways to be innovative and modular building specifically for multifamily, be it townhomes or condominiums. That kind of thing has come a long ways and is continuing to evolve. And we're looking at opportunities right here in Northern Nevada where we can, do that same type of innovation.
Christy, did you have a point on what Mark or what Brian and Brandon were talking about?
Yeah, on the modular homes, so I've looked a lot at converting shipping containers to housing, which basically gets the price per square foot down to, it starts at 100, but if you do it in volume, you can get it down to $75 or less. And like you said on the modular, once it's done, you can't tell it's a metal container. In fact, it's actually even more sturdy and safe than regular building. The problem is financing. So for the modular homes you're talking about, how do you get around the financing aspect to be able to resell, or does it have to be a master developer who buys and holds and rents it out?
Good question. And there's a difference between like a mobile home, which is going to depreciate, or even, modular homes, the modular home industry where the asset actually depreciates. And there is financing available in that industry, but it's different than your traditional mortgage, home financing that you and I would have if we bought a single family home in Douglas County. For the product we're talking about, and And we actually sometimes call it a component built factory, because the components are built in a factory, shipped on site, and erected on top of a foundation built on site. So for the type of product I'm describing, there is traditional financing. It does not depreciate like a mobile home or manufactured home, as people are more commonly familiar with.
Bill, did you have some comments that you wanted to share in this?
Yeah, I do. This has been an issue going on in Douglas County for a long time. And a couple of subdivisions that I'd like to point you to are Windhaven Gardens patio homes, Westwood Village patio homes, and Arbor Gardens. These were all attempts to create homes on small lots, like in Windhaven, the property you own is only the footprint of the house. And in Arbor Gardens, which is more recent, we even had income deed restrictions on the property. But the problem was the county never put any mechanism in place to enforce the deed restriction. They couldn't be sold to rentals. They were supposed to be under a certain income, and they ended up, because there was no enforcement, being sold to anybody who wanted them. So we've tried this in the past, and I think that concept of Arbor Gardens, Windhaven, and Westwood patio homes still is viable. But right now, Windhaven and Westwood, those patio homes are selling for $350,000 to $400,000. And when I bought one in Westwood many years ago, I paid $100,000 for it. So it's a supply and demand issue. It's what the market's going to drive. It's tough. You guys have a tough job. I want to thank all of the commission members for the hard work.
Thank you, Bill. Brian, did you have anything else, or should we move on to Mark? Okay, Mark, you're up. Questions or comments?
Sure. So the first question I have is for Brandon. I know that Douglas County seems to continually adopt the newest building codes. How much does each building code, or how much does the 2019 building code increase the cost over the 2018 building code? Is it very small, or is it extremely large?
That's a good question, and it is material. And recently, in this last year, in 2019, as Douglas County adopted and enforced the 2018 International Residential Code and the 2017 IEC, or International Electrical Code, as well as new energy code. And I will tell you that the energy code in particular, increased cost materially for us. The electrical code update also increased costs for us materially. If I were to say as a percentage of the construction costs for this recent code update, is probably about 2% of the purchase price of a home. So if 2% of a $300,000 home, so about $6,000 in code compliance. Now, thankfully, jurisdictions don't update building codes every year, but they do periodically, and they tend to increase costs. You have the cost of having to redo your designs or update your designs if you're in the middle of a project, bring it all up to the new codes, resubmit, go through that approval process, community development with the building department, which, that has its own cost associated with it, and then actually rebidding and recontracting new labor provisions. So there are increased costs associated with regulations. I know Aaron West is on the call, and Aaron could probably speak on a national level as to what you add in all the regulations in the industry, from federal to state to local regulations, what the average cost input into a home is as a result of regulation. I've seen it anywhere from 30 to 40% of the cost of a home is due to regulation. Now, obviously, we can't go without all regulations, right? Regulations exist for a reason, but it should be noted that they do have a significant cost and impact on the cost of a new home.
Okay, so I have one more follow-up question for you, Brandon. So do the home builders ever build what I would call a starter home? It seems to me like, you know, I have a young son and he looks at a home and he says, boy, I don't want to buy that. It doesn't have granite countertops. But I know the home that I first bought, I think it probably had Formica countertops. So does the home builder ever look at building those type of homes, or do they survey the market and say, no, we have to provide the granite countertops or we're never going to get them sold?
You know, I would actually say that the biggest gap between supply and demand in the entire industry is for entry level. So the entire industry right now is focused on providing housing for that missing middle, right? For you know, people who are educated, for people who are ready to own, yet are having a hard time finding that inventory. So as builders, we would like to supply that inventory. The problem is the cost of the land and the cost of construction. By the time you purchase the lot, develop, or whether you develop it to finished status or you buy a finished lot, and then you add in the construction costs, even at an entry-level spec, so even talking Formica countertops, your everything at base builder grade standards, you're still well above that entry-level price point just because of the cost of the land and the cost of construction just to get to that entry-level product. I mean, you have to realize that really, and the only difference between a high-end home and an entry-level home is in the cost of the finishes. The foundation costs what a foundation costs. There's not a lot of, you know, difference in cost for the foundation or even the framing. So the cost, yeah, the costs are less in the finishes, but because the cost of the land is so high, and construction costs, even for an entry-level spec product, are so high. And so in order to be able to even have a profitable venture that's feasible and provides any kind of investment return, you're talking about at least providing to the move-up buyer. Now, I will tell you, specifically in Douglas County, we're doing our very best to provide to that entry-level home buyer. We have 2 communities actively developing, building, and selling in Douglas County: the Towns at Montera near Minden Elementary School off Buckeye, and the Cottages community off Kimmerling Road. And those projects are the 2 most affordable projects within Douglas County, within the Carson Valley right now. And they are still a stretch for that first-time home buyer. We do have some first-time home buyers in those communities, and we're very proud of that fact, but many of them are double income households that are barely stretching to afford the smallest floor plans or smallest product level within those communities. So we're doing our best. We're laser focused on it. It's just really, really difficult because of the cost of the land, because the amount of land that's available for development is so, you know, so little, and because of the cost of the finished lot and construction costs.
Okay.
Aaron, did you have a comment? And then Bill, we'll go to Bill Driscoll. Go ahead, Aaron.
Right on. Thank you very much. I really appreciate the questions, because all of this is what's playing into, you know, the dilemma that we face, right, is trying to provide that attainable housing. You know, Douglas County is such an interesting place, right? Obviously, so beautiful. A lot of folks want to be there. But what's interesting, you know, we also have industry that wants to be there. And so, you know, from a county perspective, you want to continue to foster that potential growth of industry, right? Because if your county's not growing, it's dying, especially with Nevada's property tax structure. You need that resurgence of new growth in order to keep things rolling. And of course, the challenges associated with then providing attainable housing for that growth becomes the biggest stretch. And it is literally a conflagration of of everything that you guys have talked about. Every 3 years we get an update to the codes, and I would submit to you that, if those of you that bought a house 20 years ago, probably, were pretty satisfied with the house that was built 20 years ago. But now, here we are 7 code iterations later, and we've probably added to the total cost of construction by about 30%. Our zeal to, get more energy efficient and more and cleaner has really created some interesting dichotomies, to the point where we, now seal houses up to the point that they're so tight that they don't breathe, and then we actually have to put in mechanical ventilation systems to bring in fresh air. And so we continue to struggle with things like that. And just going back to the land piece, lot size isn't going to fix everything, but I think, Brandon's brought up some great points, and we talk about this a lot, right? Finding the right property, finding, the right fit for that property. And then as we go through the process, one of the biggest challenges we see is, you're following a prescribed process that's laid out through NRS and then further codified at the county level, but it ends up dragging on. It ends up taking an amazing amount of time and energy to go through these processes, and in every step you're trying to satisfy a whole myriad of interests, right? As you go through these project approvals. And so, Brandon's point earlier in his presentation about there's so many lots out there that just do not make sense to build on at this point, because you probably had a developer who said, as they went through the process, well, I'm actually not going to build the houses on there. So sure, I'll agree to, larger lot sizes, more open space, more improvements. The list goes on and on and on. And we've certainly seen that become an issue over the last 10 years as well. And so, we looking at the industry right now, when you're trying to balance, 30% of the cost for land, 30% of the cost for the physical construction, and then 30% really on trying to get this thing out of the ground and the regulatory costs associated with it. It really is going to take everybody working together to try and find some solutions. And I applaud some of the comments about innovation, also about some of our societal expectations, because I share some of those concerns that now, it's just almost become you're discriminating against somebody if you take them into a house that doesn't have granite and wood floors and things of that nature, right? Can we get back to kind of what some of those expectations are for attainable housing, and then how do we innovate and how do we get more creative? Whether it's through panelization, whether it's through alternative means. But we want to continue to be a resource for you guys, and really appreciate you having the conversation.
Thank you, Aaron. Bill, you had your hand up. Could you like make some comments now?
Thank you, sir. Yeah, I would. Having been in the code enforcement business, I can speak from both sides of the bench. Okay, code enforcement and code adoption is always going to be sold to the commission on the basis of public safety, health and safety. How many people do you want to die? Well, and that's hard to fight. But I think the question, commissioners, is that you have to ask, how much is this code adoption going to cost? What is it going to cost the home buyer? Let's take an example. Last year, the East Fork Fire District, of which I used to be fire chief, adopted a sprinkler ordinance code, residential sprinklers, which essentially is probably going to cut out half of the lots that require well and septic. The residential sprinkler on a house with a well will add no less than $12,000 to the cost of the house. While in all of the discussions with the Planning Commission and with the County Commission, nobody asked that question. What the fire department presented was very slanted. They're for health and safety. But I think you got to get a little more objective. Is $12,000 a worthwhile investment? Modern construction is fire resistive. Maybe in some cases we don't need residential sprinklers. But I'm going to tell you, the fire department's going to push for them, and you wait, in a year or two, they're going to be wanting residential sprinklers on all residential construction. And that's just one example. So when you're asked to, when the county is asked to approve a code update, find out what it's going to cost. I think that's important. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bill. Mark, that was a good question. Any other questions at this point, Mark?
Sure. Again, I want to thank Sam and Tom for their presentations. This is just a clarifying question for me. So, Sam, the number you showed us of 1,622, those are lots that have been recorded. They're not going to go away, correct?
Mr. Neddenriep, this is Sam Booth. The subdivision list, I believe, is where the 1,622 number came from. Let's see. So those are not vested projects, and those could be subject to expiration.
And can I follow up with a question as to how long are these things good for before they expire?
Each project is different in the conditions of approval, but typically, if it's just a subdivision that's not part of a development agreement, that's not vested, or has some other agreements there, there's 4 years given to record the final map. And then within a plan development, they can set their own timeline and phasing, and that's approved by the Planning Commission and the board. But per NRS, just a subdivision map, the final map has to be presented within 4 years for recording.
Have you ever I shouldn't say you, has any board not approved an extension, or extensions granted pretty easily?
I can say that I know that we have had projects that have expired, or phases of a project that have expired. You know, I can't speak to the entire history of how the board or the Planning Commission has done that, but I know that there's projects on this list and some that we've removed from this list that just totally expired.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Dave Acola, would you like to go next?
Yes, I have a number of questions. Okay, I don't see Rancho Sierra on the project list, and I don't see the Park 2500 on the list for 2. Also, they show let's see, 2031, the vested projects are all disappeared. Do they all disappear at that time, or are there other times they disappear? And let's see. We did a master plan amendment last year, changing Big George and Riverwood. How many houses were included in those projects prior to the master plan amendment? And let's see. I think if some of the projects go away prior to 2031, we need to have that date on there so we know what we're dealing with. I've heard that the Virginia Ranch is going to go away in a few years. Well, that's 1,020 houses. When do they go away? I also think that extensions shouldn't be automatically given to any project until they come back before the Planning Commission and BLCC. Those are my questions.
Kirk, I think you're still on mute.
I'm sorry. Sam, very good questions that Dave asked. Do you want to take a crack at 2 or 3 or 4 of those?
Yes, this is Sam Booth. Tom, feel free to jump in and help me here if you want. The first thing I noticed, and thank you, Dave, Rancho Sierra was recently approved this year, is not on the subdivision list, but that should be added, and we will do that to page 2, the subdivision list. Off the top of my head, that was 239 units in the receiving area adjacent to the ranchos and is part of the ranchos. So that was just a recent approval that we hadn't added to the list yet, but should be added. I know Dave asked about the Park Ranch. Now, of course, we've had a lot of conversations in the last year about the development agreement and what was approved last year. So it's not a vested project, so we don't have it on this list. Page 1, that is the vested list. It would and it's not on the subdivision list because he hasn't brought forward any proposals, and he has no subdivision map approval, no plan development approvals. The 2,500 units, that's thrown around was a potential cap on growth. So it's a potential he could reach based on the development agreement that was approved by the commissioners. But as far as community development or planning, we haven't seen any proposals for a plan development. I think we've said that a specific plan would be appropriate or a plan development because it's receiving area. You'd have to file those first. And then as part of those, you would see tentative subdivision maps, maybe for each phase, or if he has different sections of the development. Until those are brought forward, and those will come forward to the Planning Commission and to the commissioners for approval, it's not appropriate to add them to the subdivision list or to the vested projects list. And also as part of that, it wouldn't be a vested project, obviously, because that was approved after the growth management ordinance. And from what I remember of the development agreement, he would have to purchase or be subject to needing an allocation. And so we discussed that last year as part of that process, but the pool in his subdivision would be subject to the project list. So there are about 600 in the allocation, the project allocation pool, that he would be subject to competing against Brandon or any other developer in the county for those allocations. So that 2,500 couldn't come at any time. And of course, just because it's in the receiving area, it would need transfer of development rights. But again, because we haven't seen and the Planning Commission hasn't approved, commissioners haven't approved any development approvals, we are not putting that on this list at this time. I know, Dave, remind me if there were a couple other questions you had in there. Anybody else who wants to speak to any of those?
The Virginia Ranch specific plan is a little more complicated in that it doesn't have a development agreement, but it has a specific plan associated with that. There was also a lawsuit against Douglas County, and in that lawsuit, there was awarded in a time frame. I think it was 2034. I was trying to find the paperwork on that for the expiration of the actual specific plan. So I think that 2034 was the date when the Virginia Ranch, that 1,026 homes expires.
That's correct, Tom. I think originally Virginia Ranch was set to expire or have already expired, but there was a settlement agreement from a lawsuit, and that settlement agreement stated that the county had to extend Virginia Ranch's approval for 30 additional years, and that was from the date of approval. So that was 2004. It was approved, so it's now extended to 2034.
But I do like the idea of adding on that, Sam, the expiration dates of these subdivisions. I think that would be a good.
That's something we could do. Yeah.
Thank you. Dave Acola, did you have other questions that you wanted to ask or follow up on any of those?
And the other question he had was the Big George and Riverwood. I see Riverwood on here at 119. I haven't been able to find the Big George.
Big George is at the top of the subdivision page.
179. And those didn't change with that last round, right? The numbers didn't change, Sam?
Well, they were not on the subdivision list prior to that. So we added them just after they were approved this spring. So Big George and Riverwood are new additions to the list.
I got you.
Thank you. Dave, did you have other questions or comments?
No, I'd just like to see the expiration dates on some of these approvals so that the Planning Commission can take a look at the list and say, okay, we have 2,000, we have 10,000 or whatever. If it changes next month, we need to know that.
Excellent points, Dave. Very, very well put. Anything else that you wanted to move on to now, or should we move on to Bryce?
Not this time.
Thank you very much, Dave. Bryce, you're up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also would like to thank the staff, Sam and Tom and your whole team, for great work that you continue to do putting this stuff together. This is it's been around for a long time. It's a tough task to solve, but I appreciate your efforts. Thank you to Mr. Driscoll and Mr. Hill for being here as well. Appreciate your time. Mr. Hill, one of the questions I have for you regarding the cottages at Carson Valley. So Mr. Driscoll presented that the median home price was about $419,000, and of that, looks like the average price in your development there is about $405,000. You've got 4 price points, but on average $405,000, approximately 80 units with the future phase still left to build. And the other thing is that the sales are down 12% over last year. Price is down 12% over last year. It appears that there's at least a demand issue for that price point, or you'd build them all out and have them sold. Can you speak to kind of what the demand is? Is the demand receding in that price point, or what's causing that? And maybe there's a greater demand at a lower price point, and we'll talk about that in a second. What's causing you to not be able to build out all of that and sell it at that 400 to 420 price point?
Good question, Bryce. And let me speak first to the median price point in that community, the cottages at Carson Valley off Kimmerling Road. You're right, our average price point there is just over 400,000. And then to speak to the demand below that and above that, the demand falls off precipitously above 400,000 for a product of that size and that density. We are and will sell out that community likely this year in 2020, finish deliveries in 2021 in that community. And the average price point will remain probably just over 400,000. But we do see demand, for example, just in that one community, the average square footage ranges from just over 1,500 square feet going for about 365 to the largest floor plan, about 2,200 square feet for close to 450. And the demand for the two product types is remarkably different. Everyone wants the larger one, right? But the affordability issue really comes into play once you get, in above 400,000, the number of people that can qualify for that kind of home. There are still, but it typically requires a situation where a buyer is using equity and income to purchase that more expensive home.
Thank you, Mr. Hill. Another follow-up question is, being in the construction industry myself, though, in commercial versus residential, material prices, first of all, land is always the driving factor. Material prices, availability of labor, all of those things, which all of those exist in Carson Valley as challenges, especially the land basis. So when we talk about attainable housing in Carson Valley, I understand density may help that, I'm not sure. But what suggestions do you have to lower the cost of the projects? Because to me, that's the only way we're going to lower the price.
Great. So let me speak first to density. We've spoken to this before. By either clustering density in a planned development or just allowing increased intensification of density, you're facilitating a larger number of units in the same acreage. And so your price per square foot of land goes down quite a bit, and you're able to offer, more product at a lower price point. All same thing applies when you allow densification vertically as well. You're able to, spread the land cost over more units. If the more units you can spread land cost over, the more you can pass that savings on to a customer on the other end. So density does have a huge play in that. Then on the other side of things, what else can we do? Well, we've talked about being more open to things such as component built construction. I talked about, modular factories. Aaron West mentioned SIPS panels, and anytime you can take pieces and parts and processes of that construction process and mass produce things, whether it's through 3D printing, whether it's through building an entire module in a factory, anytime you can mass produce those kind of things and do them in a controlled environment where things are going to be more efficient, that can also help drive down costs. One of the things that we fight against in Douglas County is the cost of labor. Our labor costs are much higher in Douglas County than they are, say, in Reno, because we don't have a trade base that lives in Douglas County, that lives in the Carson Valley. So a large percentage, not all, but a large percentage of our construction trade base drives daily from Reno, from Carson City, from Dayton, coming down to our location because they can't afford to live here. And so companies have to pay them to drive. And so they get paid often for the drive time, they get paid for the fuel. Well, all of those costs get charged to the builder, who then has to build it into his cost structure, which adds to the cost of a home. So when you don't have a housing for your trade base, much like you don't have housing for the hospitality industry or much of the service industry or teachers or firemen, when you don't have housing, then it becomes more expensive to get them to Douglas County to perform the work. So your costs of labor also go up. So if we had attainable housing for people who work in the construction industry, we wouldn't have to pay the additional cost of fuel, travel, and transportation for that trade base as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One more question for Mr. Booth. Sam, how many multifamily residential units are currently approved or in the pipeline somewhere, and where are they located, if you happen to know?
Thanks, Bryce. This is Sam Booth. We don't have the subdivisions that are approved on this list or the allocation, either of those tables tracked based on whether they're single family, multifamily, or which zoning district they are. Tom and I, in a few other projects, have done some of that research. Tom may have a better idea of where those projects are multifamily wise, throughout the county.
Yeah, we've got the Residence 1861 is right behind Heritage Bank. It's a 5-acre project. Right now it's zoned MFR. That was a little controversial because we changed the zoning to a hard zone rather than receiving area. I think, Mark, you may remember that piece coming forward, but that one I think is 81 units, I want to say. And then there was another apartment complex, Thoroughbred Crossing. I think there was 20 units right behind Guns and Arrows or Guns and Ammo, just south of Rite Aid. Those are the two developments. We've changed a lot of multifamily residential properties, zonings to the MFR zoning designation, but like Brandon's product, and they're going to turn those into single family homes, but they're attached, so they're condominiums, and that ends up being a single family product that is built on a multifamily residential zone, which is allowed in code. But those are only two apartments that I'm aware of that are coming forward, and 1861 has a permit ready to issue. They're having a funding problem.
You know, I can add that when Tom and I have asked GIS for locational data on MFR zoning, and we've looked at some of those projects, most of them are in the Minden Gardnerville area, and there have been some recent approvals. If you remember during the North County presentations, Riverwood and Big George and the North Douglas County specific plan, we had some graphs that charted most of the multifamily residential zoning is being built out at single family densities. And we do have a few new projects that are around in Gardnerville on the south side there near Pine Nut and Muller. In the multifamily residential, there's 158 units Chuck Hathoot had for the manufactured home project. Would be, you know, and he pitched that as a 55 and older community in a more attainable price point. But it still isn't, you know, a higher density apartment type style, which is your typical multifamily that you're thinking of.
Thank you. I'm done, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Bryce. Christy, we'll go to you next.
One question I was curious of, Bill, for you, when you said that people would be coming after COVID loosens up. What makes you say that, and what type of homeowners or I guess people would you anticipate moving?
Well, I'm based on, I was used to be president of the Realtors Association. Based on the information from the Realtors Association, it's a subjective. People are going to want our quality of life. If they're in a high density area where they're afraid of the COVID and they're high risk people, they're probably going to want to go to a low risk area. I don't think the nature of the hire is going to change. There's still going to be semi-retired, retired people, or the few people that opportunity to work for either Bentley or GE.
So the same demographic of people, just more interest. Okay. Okay. I think that's it overall for me.
Great. Thank you, Christy. I have a couple of questions for the staff, and then for Bill and for Brandon. Sam, the spreadsheet that you've done on the vested list and the subdivision list, I think is very helpful. But can we, following up on what Bryce was saying earlier, can we put another column in there that shows the zoning or the housing type of each of the projects that we've got on there? And then, because I think that would allow us to add up the total units by zoning type and give us a rough feel for, okay, have we got so much of this and so much of that? And then just as far as format, I like the idea of the list where we're having the number of building permits on each of the projects, but maybe we could even do that in a separate spreadsheet, so that'd be a little easier for us to get a feel for what we've got and then what's going on. Are those something that could be worked on?
Yeah, definitely. We can do that. We can add the zoning, locational criteria, add that into the list. Sure.
Great, thank you. And then this is kind of a larger question. I included in the supplemental materials, I'm not sure you've had a chance to look at it or other people have, about the whole question of what is rural. We hear a lot from people, we need to keep our rural nature of Douglas County, and I agree with that. But I think the Census Bureau says that anything over 50,000 in a geographic area like a county is urban. So by definition, anything under 50,000 is rural. But you really see when you look at the Census Bureau information that I provided that doesn't take into account the size of the area. You see one county in Maine that I think was listed as rural, but it had 173,000 people. So I really think people should be looking at Douglas County from the standpoint of our geographic size and our population. Just because we move above 50,000, if that happens in the next census, I don't think that necessarily says, oh, you're no longer rural Douglas County. And I would point to the census information again when it listed some of the counties. Douglas County, it says, is 31.6% rural. And then you compare that to Story County, and that's 92.6% rural. So I don't know if you have comments on that, Sam, but that's just something that I've thought needed to be looked at further and clarified. We're not going to no longer be rural if we hit 50,000 and one person.
Yeah, I don't have much more to comment on that, Kirk. Definitely saw what was added to the packet. And I'm familiar with some of the different locational criteria that they've talked about with the census tracts and defined urbanized areas by census tract in the population there. But I think it will take quite a while for certain areas of the county to be determined as an urban area via this, the census tract.
Excuse me, Bill, if I could get some of your comments, and I wanted to read again some of the things that you put in your statement, because I think they bear repeating. You say, for the past several years, the available inventory of Douglas County homes has been limited, especially under the 350,000 price range. The concept of supply and demand maintains our home values. I think that's an important point. And then you go on to say, a contentious but important housing issue is that of having housing that the people that work here can afford. It is difficult for a single income family employed in the Carson Valley, and especially Lake Tahoe, to find a home they can afford to purchase or even rent. Many employees live outside our community. The greatest demand for homes seems to be in a price range of under 350. And then following on, you say, our community needs to come together and work together to make certain that growth focuses on quality, fairness, and respecting private property rights. With planned quality growth, our local businesses have a greater chance of success and will draw more small businesses and shopping opportunities for Douglas County residents. I think those are things we need to think about. We need to go into greater detail on what they mean. And I'd just like to ask you, do you agree that we've got a housing affordability problem and that we need to take steps to address that problem?
Well, the problem's clear. But when you look at the overall picture, I don't know what can be done. The cost of property, the cost of construction, and what the market will bear. Right now, if you look at the graph of the 5 years average price, the market keeps going up. So yes, it is a problem, but I don't have, nor have I heard, a real viable solution. The modular homes, what many people don't know is we have a subdivision in the valley that's totally modular homes. I just had a client build a modular homes out on the east side. But anyway, it's a multifaceted problem. I don't have any one answer, and there may not be a solution. It just may have to bear with the market.
Brandon, would you care to address that question?
Yeah, we certainly do have an affordability and an availability of housing stock here in Douglas County. I mean, that's been demonstrated over and over again when, just in this conversation we've had today about employees, when someone's looking to come and work for GE here or coming to work for any of the businesses in Douglas County, where are they going to live? That's the biggest obstacle most businesses in Douglas County face in terms of growth and expansion is where will their employees live, and the recruitment challenges that creates when they learn that that employee who's looking to relocate here can only afford to live in Dayton and is going to have a 45-minute commute into Douglas County. So we absolutely, without question, have an affordability and we have an affordability issue and a lack of inventory that is in that affordable or attainable price point. How do we solve it? I agree with Bill. It's multifaceted. I think there's lots of ways we have to approach it. I've certainly suggested a number of those during this meeting today, and I think we can come together as a community and look at how we solve that for the health and well-being of Douglas County.
Thank you. Brandon, if I could just follow on with that, one more question. We also get the question raised at times, development should pay for itself. Can you had one of your slides, can you go back to that issue? Does development pay for itself? What costs do builders pay to the county for sewer, water permits? And do you think those costs are a reasonable cost? Do you think they're too high? Should we increase them because we don't want existing taxpayers to pay for development? Can you give me some comments on that?
So that's a good point you raised in a contentious discussion, and certainly development and home building creates impacts without doubt. So should there be some of those impacts on infrastructure, should some of those impacts be borne by the builders, by the developer, and in turn, we have to realize those are ultimately borne by the homeowner, right? By the person who buys that product. So yes, there are impacts. Yes, builders and development do pay those impacts. We pay those impacts in terms of every project that gets approved has a very lengthy list or conditions of approval. The most recent project we received conditions of approval on, I think between the town and the county, it was like 15 pages of conditions of approval. That's just one example. Satisfying those conditions of approval can be very expensive. Water rights, it takes 1.1 acre feet of water per unit. That costs at least $10,000 to $12,000 on average just for water rights. Another $5,000 for connection fees to sewer and water. So certainly development and building does pay for the impacts that they create on utility infrastructure. Electrical meters, we pay NV Energy, Southwest Gas, Frontier Communications, Charter Spectrum. We pay impact fees for those connections for that infrastructure up front. And so we do pay for all. The developer, the builder absolutely does pay for the impacts on that infrastructure, especially the utility infrastructure. In many cases, there are conditions of approval that require off-site improvements as well to adjacent arterial roadways and other things. Sometimes it's a fine line, Kirk, because if those become too onerous, for example, as Aaron was illustrating, sometimes the individual or the developer getting the approvals and going through the approval process doesn't ever plan on actually building it out, and so doesn't count all the costs of the conditions of approval that he agrees to. So they say, yeah, I'll build that section of 120-foot right-of-way for Muller Parkway with 4 lanes each way, and yeah, I'll build half a mile of Hayborn Meadows. Those kind of things, all of a sudden they sound good, makes people happy that those got thrown in. Well, now all of a sudden that project's can now sit on the list of vested projects for 20 years. So yeah, you might feel good that you made development pay for itself, but did it really pay for itself? Because now that element of the transportation plan never happened. It's been on the books for 30, 40 years, but never happened. The developer never got stuck with it because it was never developed. It was never feasible. So it's a fine line. Yes, development needs to pay for itself, but if we make the conditions of approval and if we make the costs of development so onerous, then it'll exacerbate the attainable or affordable housing crisis by increasing the cost and prices of homes. But it'll also create a lack of supply because projects just won't move forward.
Great, thank you very much. I've concluded the questions that I have at this point, but I'm happy to go back to other individuals if have questions or comments that you'd like to make. Christy, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, the one thing I'd like to throw out there in looking at all the affordable housing options and workforce housing, both of the lake and the valley, if there was something that the county could do to back or to guarantee some of the loans for the affordable housing options. I know like with the shipping containers, probably 30 plus lenders, creative ones, credit unions, but like they just won't finance the shipping containers. But if a jurisdiction were to provide a guarantee on that, then we could potentially build those out, and that would allow each individual unit to be resold to help build homeowners at a beginner entry level at, you know, maybe 100,000 for a 700 square foot unit. So I don't know what all the mechanics are from a legal standpoint of the county backing loans like that, or what that would even be. But if it's something we could think about, since that is an affordable housing component that can look great, it just can't get any kind of financing. And even if you spent your own cash to build it, you couldn't then sell it to a future homeowner, which kind of defeats the purpose of getting more people into their own home ownership.
Very good point. Maureen, go ahead.
Again, I'd like to reinforce that a lot of the things we're talking about are policy issues, and we need to have a meeting with the Board of Commissioners so we can all get the same information at the same time and have a conversation about creative ways to provide housing. We did not talk about mixed use, which would be retail on the bottom, housing on top. We didn't talk about reconstruction as a viable option. And Mark brought it up and Brandon reinforced it. I think the expectation of buyers is very important. What is a renter expecting? And if buyers are looking for solely new construction with high upgrades, the market will dictate who can afford what. So I want to thank everyone for their comments, but I really want to press for a joint meeting with the Board of Commissioners to get some better information.
Thank you, Maureen. Other people want to express questions or comments? I agree with you, Maureen. Those are a lot of policy considerations, many of which are not in our jurisdiction, but I did want to start the discussion, bring out alternatives, bring out questions, move to a situation where we have better information, more factual information, accurate information. Where we may have to be making decisions in that they'd like to add at this point. Okay, great. Well, I think we've had a very useful discussion, and Bill and Brandon and Aaron, I appreciate your joining us for this. If you do have follow-up comments, we would welcome those at any point. So we'll end the discussion on item 3. And I will move to closing public comment then. At this time, public comment will be taken on those items that were within the jurisdiction and control of the Planning Commission. Public comment is limited to 3 minutes per person who has left a voice message on the Douglas County's public comment line, 775-783-6088. The voice messages will be played to the public and Planning Commission in the order they were recorded. No more than one voice message public comment per person will be played to the Planning Commission and public. Colleen, do we have a public comment now? I note the time is 3:49.
Yes, we do. We have about 4 messages so far.
Okay, you can go ahead.
Okay.
For the record, Jeannie Shizuru, S-H-I-Z-U-R-U. I want to thank the Planning Commission for approving the variance to add overnight boarding to pet services for the whole county, but especially in Holiday Inn Pet Resorts commercial location near Ham Dogs. I'm looking forward to resuming business with them, and I'm grateful for this zoning issue to come to an amicable and logical end. If any of you have any pets that you need daycare or overnight boarding for, I hope that you will try them out. They're right kind of close to Ham Dogs, and recommend them to your friends also because they are a great business. I'm glad you got to hear from Stacy Kicksmiller. She's quite the business owner. So they are, the whole company and her parents are a real asset to this community. Thank you again. Bye.
Ellie Waller, ELLIEWALLER. This is my second comment. Again, on the necessity to update community plans. Now that you've seen the data, done your review, I just want to bring to your attention, there were 691 total homes on the one chart, which includes Indian Hills and Jacks Valley community area. Of the 691, 640 homes or units, as stated, between 2016 and 2020 are approved in that area. It's Big George, Riverwood, Snyder Ranch called Freedom now, Stall MUC, Sunridge number 3, Valley Knolls, Willow Hills, JC Valley Knolls. Again, this community area deserves to have and weigh in on the future of the number of units, the size of the lots, the location of where this housing is. Thank you for the opportunity. I urge you again to start the community plan process. Thank you.
Jim Slade. This agenda item is explained quite clearly. Quote, for discussion only, review of housing needs and availability in Douglas County by community development staff by Sam Booth and Tom Dallaire. There's no indication that anyone else would be allowed to speak, and therefore no public comment by anyone other than staff and the planning commissioners should be allowed. Yet Chairman Walder, while allowing the general public no opportunity to speak, invited the real estate and building industries to comment ad nauseum. That was completely inappropriate and almost certainly an open meeting law violation. Needless to say, the real estate and building industries are biased special interest groups with a financial incentive to support development and future growth. Chairman Walder, in inviting these biased groups to speak, has again shown his own pro-development bias. Both Driscoll and Hill submitted written comments and should have spoken if they wanted to in open and closing public comment like everyone else, and should not have been given special consideration. Yet Mr. Driscoll was allowed to speak for more than eight minutes, and Mr. Hill to speak ad nauseum for over 15 minutes, and then to be able to respond whenever he felt like it to any comments like planning commissioners. Regarding the presentation by the Director of Community Development, Mr. Dallaire, why was that not submitted in the agenda packet, or at least in the supplemental material? It appears that, again, Mr. Dallaire was not prepared in a timely manner, which, of course, is disappointing. On the growth management ordinance, you know that that was an outgrowth of the Sustainable Growth Initiative passed by the voters, and it did not allow any rollover. That unused allocation rollover was a compromise made in the growth management ordinance, but the SGI itself was designed to avoid boom and bust. That's why it was called sustainable. The reason that Nevada as a state and Clark, Douglas, and Lyon counties in particular struggled so much in the Great Recession with unemployment, foreclosures, and underwater mortgages so much higher than other counties and other states is because Nevada and the three counties mentioned, including Douglas, had grown so fast prior to the recession. By retaining huge rollover year after year, you are inviting yet another boom, which will inevitably be followed by a bust. Is that what you want? That would certainly not be in the public interest, even though some developers would be able to make vast projects. This item was presented all in a completely inappropriate and biased way, exhibiting the chairman's bias towards pro-development interests and a total disregard for the general public. It was shameful.
One more.
This is Nicholas Meyer from Gardnerville. I want to comment on the agenda meeting today, review of housing needs and availability in Douglas County by community development staff. I want to voice my opposition to the county trying to plan what we call affordable housing. Any affordable housing that is attempted to be built in this county is probably going to be outbid by persons coming from California that have much higher equity value in their homes. So it's going to be very difficult to provide any kind of affordable housing for local folks without somehow having a closed type of market. We already have 8,000 houses that are approved to be built in the county. And we have a 2% limit on the amount of houses that can be built. So I think this is a misplaced effort. And I think the Planning Commission would be better, their time would be better spent on other issues. Thank you.
That's all I have right now.
Thank you, Colleen. We'll wait another couple of minutes, and while we're waiting, I want to again remind everyone that public comment can also be made by submitting comments by email to planning@douglasnv.us. Please make sure to include your name, item number, and position on the item. And I would also remind people, any written public comment received the day of the meeting will be compiled and added as supplemental materials to the county's website and distributed to the Planning Commission within 24 hours after the meeting. Before we conclude, let me thank all the county staff for their assistance today. Thank you, fellow commissioners, for your participation. Thank you also to those who presented information today and to those who have watched and provided their comments. With that, any other planning commissioners have closing comments that they'd like to make? Okay, Colleen, anything else come in while I was speaking?
No, it looks like we're good.
Okay, so we started public comment at 3:49 and I now have 3:57. So with that, we will close public comment and we will adjourn the meeting. Thank you all.